Janet Sanders was a recent college graduate from Albany, Georgia. She moved to Florida within a year of her graduation to a house her father left her in his will. Janet's father, William Sanders, was a successful stockbroker and real estate agent. During Janet's sophomore year of college, her father died, leaving her with a handsome amount of money, along with a couple of properties. Janet chose to move to the house in Florida because it was her favorite house to go to during family vacations. Janet's father's death took a real significant toll on her. She had a best friend that followed her from high school to college that she would end up losing touch with, along with other close friends. Janet never had a close relationship with her mother, who after her father's death would remarry to a side fling she had for years. Janet was looking for a fresh start, with new faces and a permanent change of scenery. 6 months into her new life, things were going good so far and seemed to be getting better when she met Darius. Darius was from the area. He worked at the grocery store where Janet did the majority of her shopping, one day offering to take her cart to the car, and a friendship started soon thereafter. Over the next year, Darius and Janet blossomed into a beautiful couple. One connection that Janet and Darius shared was their respective pasts and their relationships with their parents. The connection rooted by neither of them talking or asking questions about their past. One evening when Darius got off work, he went over to Janet's house and noticed Janet was feeling sad and distant. So to cheer things up, he decided he would offer to take her to one of her favorite restaurants downtown. She didn't want to at first, but a few conversations later she would agree, and they went out. When they got to the restaurant, they didn't have any reservations, so they stood in line waiting for a table to open up. While they were waiting, a short, heavy-built guy came over and erupted into a warm welcome to Darius. Darius introduced him as Andrew, an old classmate from high school. They engaged in a light conversation as they waited to be seated. When it was their turn, Andrew grabbed Darius in a big hug and said, "I'll check you out later, EJ." And Janet and Darius went inside to be seated. Once Janet and Darius got settled in, Darius began talking about his shift at the job and other various things when he realized Janet was distracted. So he asked what was going on with her. Janet would open up a bit to Darius about her past. She explained how seeing him and his friend reminded her of a friend she hadn't talked to in years, and how the unusual death of her father drove her away from all of her friends. Darius showed remorse. But Darius threw Janet off a bit when he suggested that maybe she should let the past be and open up a bit and make more friends. Janet was expecting him to maybe suggest finding and reaching out to her friend. Janet brought up how she felt like she owed her friend at least a phone call or a letter. But Darius shrugged off what Janet was saying, making it clear that his suggestion of meeting new people was the only solution to Janet's depression. A couple of days later, Darius's car was in the shop, so Janet had to pick him up from work. While she was getting ready, her phone rang. When she checked and looked, it was her mother. She held the phone for a second but decided to let it ring and go to voicemail. On the way bringing Darius to his house, Janet, with a slight concern in her voice, asked Darius would he be comfortable talking about his past. Darius began to stutter a little, asking Janet what she wanted to know. Janet asked how calm all this time went by, and Andrew was the only friend she had met so far. Darius, still stuttering a little, gave Janet a trivial rundown on how he and his mom lived alone after his dad left them for another woman, and how he became sort of an outcast to his peers afterwards. Andrew was one of the ones who was, and still is, nice to him. Janet instantly felt bad for asking, even though his story had a ton of holes in it. He continued that his mother died of complications from diabetes shortly after he graduated high school. Janet apologized for asking, but Darius was all right with it, saying it was past time they told their stories. As they pulled in his driveway, he asked Janet if he could shower up and go home with her. Janet agreed but instead offered to come by later on and pick him up for dinner. While Janet was cleaning up and deciding what to get for dinner, she decided that she would get in contact with her estranged friend. She called the old number that she still had stored in her phone, and luckily it was still the right number, but she got the voicemail. She listened to her friend's voice say, "You've reached Emily," but hung up without leaving a message. When she hung up, it reminded her to check her own voicemail, remembering that her mother called earlier. When she checked her voicemail, her mother's voice sadly came through. "Hey Janet, this is your mom. I just wanted to talk to you a bit and check up on you. Well, Marcus left me last week and is filing for divorce. And I just wanted to talk to someone close. Give me a call, sweetheart." When the message was over, Janet erased it. She was taken away by what she heard, but had no way of taking it. After she was done cleaning, she went upstairs to take a shower when she got a call. She picked it up and it was Emily. Even though they hadn't talked in years, Emily was excited to talk to her. Before long, the two were engaged in a conversation, catching up on everything that has happened over the years. Emily would bring something up to Janet that threw the reunion a curve. Emily sternly stated that she had been looking for her from some time. Emily explained to Janet that her fiancé was a detective. Janet had no idea where Emily was going with this, but Emily went on to tell Janet that her fiancé was investigating an old case. Janet asked what case was that, and Emily responded with, "Your father's." Janet paused for a moment, taken away by this. Janet aggressively asked why in the hell would he be doing that? Why investigate a heart attack? Emily tried to explain further, but Janet cut her off, saying that maybe Darius was right, maybe I just need new friends, and hung up. Janet checked the time and realized she was running late, so she ordered takeout and jumped in the shower. When she got out, she checked her phone and had 2 missed calls, one from Emily and another from Darius. She called Darius back to apologize for running late, but before she could continue, Darius would interrupt her, saying that he would have to cancel dinner. Janet asked why, and he just said that he wasn't feeling well and that he would just see her tomorrow. With all that's been going on with her, Janet was upset, but told him it was okay and she would stop by later anyway and check on him. Darius agreed. Janet sat in the living room that evening eating her takeout when she got another phone call. And it was her mother. This time she answered. Her mom sounded better than earlier, but still sad. Janet and her mom caught up a little and got into talking about Marcus. Janet really didn't have a care for Marcus. She hadn't even met him. Before her father passed away, he and Janet's mom had been going through a rough patch, with Janet's mom playing the role of infidelity. So when she broke the news to Janet that she was getting married to the guy, Janet broke it off with her mother, not even attending the wedding ceremony. Janet listening anyways as her mother went on about how he used her for the money William left, and how he was moving back to Florida until the divorce is final. Concluding with how he was after the remainder of the money. Janet was furious with this, telling her mother how much of a fool she was, and how much she really didn't care for this, and displaying the rest of her dislikes of the situation. Janet, her mom, was silent as she went on her rant. Janet's mom broke her silence with asking Janet a horrible question. She explained to Janet that she was financially struggling with lawyer fees and other bills, and desperately needed Janet to wire her $10,000. Janet yelled out at her mom. "Are you fucking serious right now, Mom?" Janet's mom pleaded with her. Janet told her mom that she needed to think about that really hard. Janet hung up the phone with her mother and sat in her living room for the next 2 hours trying to put this together in her head. She decided to go ahead and send her mom the money. She picked up her phone and electronically wires her mom the $10,000. She went to send her mom the confirmation number through a text, but she didn't have much time when a text message came through. It was Emily asking in all capital letters to call her now. Please. Janet waited a while. Almost feeling aggravated, She called Emily back. Emily answered the phone in a horrific manner, asking Janet what was her boyfriend's name. Janet confusingly answered, Darius. Darius what? Emily asked. Darius Myers. Why are you asking? Janet replied. Emily paused for a moment. Janet furiously asked what the hell, when Emily asked her a question that would be alarming. Emily asked has she talked to her mom recently because she believed that she was in trouble. Janet was confused. But she told Emily that she, as a matter of fact, just talked to her mom and was asking for money. Emily moaned out. She told Janet to hold on a second. When the phone picked up, a deep man's voice came through. It was Emily's fiancé, and he introduced himself as such. Janet asked as calm as she could for him to elaborate. He told her that all he could say is that he is investigating the death of her father, William Sanders. They are also currently investigating Elijah Myers Sr. They believe he is a scam artist who manipulates widows for their money, even seducing women into killing their husbands, and collecting insurance, and will money. He paused for a minute, then continued that he was sorry, but his investigation is leading towards her mother having something to do with the death of her father. Janet's face was void of any color as she stood there listening to the detective on the phone. Janet asked Emily's fiancé how could any of this make sense. Her father died of a heart attack. He continued that he believes the autopsy reports were found to be false. When they looked into the doctor who performed the autopsy, they found out that he and Elijah were cousins. And 2 months after your father's death received a payment of $5,000 from Elijah. Janet was floored by all of this information. She told Emily's fiancé about the $10,000 she just wired her mom. He wrote down what Janet told him and they hung up. Janet was feeling lost and confused with all of this. She picked up her phone and called her mom, but her mom didn't answer. She next called Darius to see how he was feeling, and to see if she could come over and talk. Darius agreed and Janet went over to Darius's house. When she got there, the first thing she noticed was that Darius didn't seem too sick. As matter of fact, he seemed to be in a high spirit. But Janet just sat down and began to talk about the phone call she was receiving. Darius, who was seeming happy at first, started giving off a weird vibe, and Janet would notice it, but didn't really say anything, just regressing on telling her situation for a bit. While they were talking, Janet felt her phone vibrating but ignored it and kept talking. It immediately started vibrating again, and Darius asked if she was going to answer, but she said no as she continues to talk. Darius got up to excuse himself for the bathroom. When he was in the bathroom, Janet checked her phone to see who was calling her. It was Emily and she had left a voicemail and a text message. Janet was about to unlock her phone to read the text message when Darius's phone lit up on the coffee table, catching her eye. She saw it was a text message he received but went back to unlocking her phone. When she read the message, it was a resend of Emily's message earlier in all capital letters saying call me now, please. She texted Emily back saying that she would call in a bit. She was busy. Emily texted back, hey, you need to call me as soon as possible. Janet texted back, okay. Janet got up to walk outside and call Emily when Darius's phone lit up again. Janet couldn't explain what made her do it, but she swiped up on Darius's phone to see who was texting him. It was an unsaved number. The first message was a confirmation number to a money transfer. The second message was, I sent you a gift, son. I'm done with this bitch. Be back in Florida in the morning. Janet was trembling and confused. She scrolled up to read more messages but only saw one message that Darius sent that said, shit is getting hot, pops, we gotta move on this fast. Janet closed out the message and turned the screen off. She was about to head out the door to make her call, feeling really scared and confused when Darius returned from the bathroom. He asked her where was she going and she told him that she needed to make a call and she would be right back. Darius looked at Janet awkwardly and asked why did she need to go outside. She just responded with, "It's important and I don't want to be rude and talk on the phone while we're sitting together." Darius shrugged and said okay. Janet grabbed her purse and walked outside. She sat in her car and called Emily back. When Emily answered, she immediately asked Janet where she was. Janet told her she was at Darius's house. Why? Emily told Janet that after they hung up earlier, her fiancé looked into Elijah and his son. Janet would be smashed with mixed emotions when Emily told her that her mother's ex-husband's son's name is Elijah Darius Myers Jr. Janet dropped her phone. Tears filled Janet's eyes as she quickly reached for her keys to leave. Darius walked out of the house. With his arms in the air, he was asking Janet where was she going, what's going on, why are you leaving? Janet didn't answer him. She reversed out of the yard and pulled off. She remembered that she was on the phone with Emily. When she picked it back up, Emily was still on the line. Emily asked if everything was okay. She heard her talking to someone, and Janet assured her she was okay. Emily suggested they stay on the phone until Janet got home. Janet made it home okay and told Emily she needed some rest and would be in touch in the morning. All night long, Darius would call and text Janet, but she would not answer or text back. She just laid in her bed thinking about how all of this was adding up, and kicking herself for not realizing this earlier. She remembered when Emily made the connection between the last names, and thought about how Darius' friend called him EJ. It all sank in as she fell asleep. The next morning, Janet called Emily, but her fiancé answered instead. They exchanged hellos and he would get straight to the point. He told Janet that last night they questioned the doctor who performed the autopsy on her father. Feeling pressured, they got him to admit that he falsified the documents, and with no hesitation ratted Elijah Myers out. With a bit of persuasion and light threatening, he also got the doctor to tell him about Elijah and his son. Darius had nothing to do with the operation, but was fully aware of what his father was doing. He knew that Janet's dad was a victim of his dad's demonic schemes against women. So with that, they have enough to charge Darius too, because he received payments from his dad off of the scams he pulled. So an arrest warrant will be issued for him within the day. Janet was pleased and thankful for the news, thanking him, but he stopped her. He wasn't finished. He continued with, "Unfortunately, upon further questioning of the doctor, Janet's mother was being charged with the murder of Janet's father as of this morning." Janet let out a stressful cry. He went on. Due to the last payment that Elijah Sr. received being routed to Janet, she was being asked to come back to Georgia and clear her name up. He assured Janet that she had his word he would do his best to keep her clear from anything as long as she told the truth. Janet's world was thrown upside down. That night, Janet made the drive back up to Albany, Georgia. The next morning, she went down to the station where she finally got to see her best friend after 2+ years of no contact. They talked for a bit before Janet went in to talk to the investigators. After answering a few questions, she was ultimately let go, and she went over to Emily's house. They sat and talked for a while when Emily's fiancé came home. He made himself a drink and sat down with them. Janet asked for the details and he explained for her. Janet's mother confessed to poisoning her husband William Sanders, with money being the main motive. She told investigators that after the money dried up, Elijah Sr. became violent and didn't believe the money ran out. Janet's mother had to explain to Elijah that Janet was the main beneficiary of her husband's will. When Elijah found that out, he turned his plan into getting money from Janet. When he found out that his son was dating Janet, it just made things better for him. And finished with how he threatened Janet's mom with going to the police and turning her in if she couldn't get the money from Janet. Janet burst into tears as Emily and her fiancé did the best to comfort her. A year later, Janet sold the house in Florida and moved out to Los Angeles, where she pursued a career with her degree. She doesn't visit nor writes her mother in prison. And never plans to.